episode 2, where you ask and I answer, or I try to answer. Alright, first one here we've got, what should I consider when choosing aftermarket wheels and tires? I suppose there's a lot of answers to that, but first things first, what look are you going for? You know, are you trying to stay classy, trying to go big pimpin'?
Big pimpin', baby.
How much you want sticking out, the offset? You know, do you have a half-ton truck, a 1-ton? Are you towing with it? You know, maybe you've got a car. Another big one too is electric vehicles, heavier cars, getting the right load-rated tire that's gonna hold up long enough for that electric car. We've had a couple of those come in, so we kind of know all about that. But yeah, I guess that's the biggest thing you should consider. Another one too, especially if you're going up in the air with, let's say, a truck, if you're going to lift it, going up in the air with tires and wheels. A lot of these questions lately are, well, I need to still fit in my garage. So that's probably a good one to think about too. How much room do you got to get in your garage if you're a garage parker? You can't go up too high if that's the case, but yeah, I mean, I think that those are all the questions that you probably should be asking yourself when you're looking at wheels and tires. What are you using it for, and whatnot. So, all right, next question. What are the benefits of installing a cold air intake? So I guess I would say there's kind of a big misconception about certain aftermarket intakes and actually a cold air intake. The newer the vehicles get nowadays, manufacturers have been pretty good actually about intake location, the way they engineer the intake box, and you know where they have them. They're actually, a lot of the vehicles now are in a pretty good area, sucking in pretty good cold air for the most part we've seen on a factory platform. There's not a whole lot to be gained there, to be brutally honest with you. Some of the gains that you're going to see from what these certain companies are putting out there, you know, their intake flows a certain percent better and yada yada. You know, the engine can't even flow that much more air to begin with. So I guess I would say, you know, on your aftermarket side of things, a lot of guys will run, I've seen lately, kind of an open style intake where you can see it a bit better, it's cool, it's powder coated, a color that you want, or somebody that maybe, you know, has on a turbo application an open style intake that isn't boxed in. You can hear the turbo better, it sounds cooler, but actually you're sucking in a lot of hot engine heat. So one of the things we always look for in a factory style application where a box can be fitted under the hood, you know, that's probably the best option you can go with for a cold air intake would be a box style intake. The advantages of running a cold air intake is if you actually are getting colder air into the engine, colder air is more dense. That being said, for the mass of air that you are fitting into the engine, colder, more dense air is going to have more oxygen, so you can run more fuel, and in a sense, it'll make more power, better fuel economy, all that kind of stuff. But like I said, all the different intakes out there you see nowadays, it's hit or miss. There's a lot of open intakes just because people love the way they look, and like I said, sometimes that isn't the best option for your application. Now sometimes that's your only option. If you're a big aftermarket turbo setup, you know, or a compound turbo setup, there is no room to put that filter in a boxed, you know, area. And in that case, guys are running, you know, maybe some sort of certain grill or things to get actual cold, fresh air in the engine bay as you're going down the road. Now you're not really losing out on too much there, but I try to stay more factory style when I'm talking the questions and answers. So benefits of installing a cold air intake is if you're actually getting colder air in a sense, it will make more power and have better fuel economy. But that's really kind of what you're after when doing a cold air intake. They sound a little cooler on some of your gasoline stuff than maybe the factory intake does. But like I said, to be honest, on a factory engine, your factory intake actually doesn't do a half bad job of that. So, alrighty guys, next question. Do any performance upgrades improve your fuel economy? which is actually a perfect question because we'll circle kind of back to the cold air intake. Yeah, there are a few things you can do to improve your fuel economy on the performance side of things. To keep it simple, obviously intake, if it's on an application where you'll actually gain from an intake, yeah, you'll improve a little bit of fuel economy. Sometimes, you know, anymore though, with like I said, how engineering is anymore, exhaust, you know, a more free-flowing exhaust usually isn't going to do a whole lot on a factory style vehicle. They already had engineered that vehicle to run as efficient as it can for the most part, to be, you know, within what they can run for emissions type of deal. Intake is a decent one. You know, exhaust, like I said, you're probably not going to see much improvements there. I would say, you know, tuning definitely can. There's a lot left on the table with factory programming, the calibration on your vehicle's computer. Again, the manufacturer can only, you know, run programs to where A, you know, they're within their power limits, and B, either the EPA, fuel economy, what they can run for certain emissions and whatnot. But if you actually are running a good tuning, have a good tune writer that writes files for that specific platform, you can see some fuel economy there too. But to keep it simple, there are a few things you can do, but you know, nothing that's going to make a night and day drastic difference for the most part. You would see better improvements with different tires usually than you would a few aftermarket parts, you know, unless you're going to spend big money. But yeah. Alrighty guys, next question actually was from our Whippled F-150 YouTube video. Mr. McDevitt had a question. He said, why?
Oh, right, for Christ's sake, why?
Hey?
Why?
Why? Because we fucking can! Because we fucking can! And if we can, we do!
Alrighty, now on to the next question. What are some tips for maintaining my car's performance between services? Generally, there's not a whole lot you should have to worry about in between your services. I would say the most important thing would be, you know, during your service, as long as you got, you know, a good, competent mechanic doing your service, giving it a halfway decent look over when it's in the shop. Let's say you're just getting an oil change. A lot of guys will go through and just kind of once over everything for you. Tires, suspension, or at least obvious visual type of things. You know, fluid levels, check your air filter every time. I guess one thing I would touch on, and I guess it wouldn't be necessarily for your engine performance, but a lot of things that get looked past, you know, even when vehicles are in here just getting performance mods, you know, we can tell right away inside a vehicle just by maybe the smell. Ooh, that smell. Or the lack of airflow that is coming out of their vents. Cabin air filters. Not a lot of people know they're a thing, but just like your house, your furnace has a filter, filters the air that you're breathing in inside the cab. Like I said, not really an engine performance thing, but one thing that gets looked past a ton would be a cabin air filter. So that'd be a good one to touch on in between services, but for the most part, as long as your mechanic is doing a good job of just giving everything a good look over during service, there's not a whole lot you should have to worry about between it. I always tell people, you know, even if you are between a service, let's say you have a big road trip planned that you're going to go on, it wouldn't hurt to, even though you're between services, have that vehicle maybe inspected or lightly looked over at least a couple weeks prior to your road trip. That way, if you, let's say you schedule it 2 days before your road trip, which we've had, and we try to make it work for everybody, but that's about the time you end up a little unhappy when there is something wrong that should be replaced before your trip, you know, and now you're scrambling to have that work done before you leave. So, but for the question itself, theoretically, no, you shouldn't have to really look at a whole lot in between servicing. But if you're ever concerned about anything, always swing it into your local shop and have them take a peek at it. Hey guys, real quick, we really enjoy making these videos. We hope you do too. If so, if you could give us a like and possibly a follow on whatever platform you're on, that'd be great. It really helps us kind of figure out which which content you guys are into, so we can kind of reach more people that might be into it like you guys, and we can keep making these types of videos. Next question. What's your take on EVs? This one's kind of a fun one. I know a lot of people, especially in this industry, you either love them or you hate them, it seems like. Obviously EVs, I don't know if it's necessarily going to be as huge of a thing as everyone's thinking, but manufacturers are dipping pretty heavily. I would say, what's my take? I like them. They're cool. They have their own purposes. Obviously range is a huge thing. Sometimes charging for certain people is one thing. I'd say pros for me is, if you have the correct setup to where you're not necessarily driving a ton for work, or the road trips you take aren't crazy far, they're cool. They're, luxurious in a way. They're quiet, obviously. A lot of them too, a lot of people don't maybe think about, but they're quick, very quick. They're, engineered. They're obviously heavy cars just because of the whole battery and electronic motor situation. It's going to add a little weight than your generic internal combustion engine car, but they're engineered to have an awesome low center of gravity for what they weigh. They're fun to ride in, fun to drive for the most part. I'd say cons for me, this is another part on my personal opinion. They're cool for a little bit when you have one, when you drive one. You get in it and it's just any speed, it gets traction, it hauls, they're fast, they're fun. There's something weird about not hearing much noise when you're getting pushed back in the seat. That's kind of cool. But to me, I'm still a little old school in that essence, in a way where I like a little bit of sketchiness to what I do. Something about hopping in a early 2000s car that has 800 to 1,000 horsepower, running on, street tires, and just laying her the mail. No ABS, no traction control, rolling through some gears. 1 second you could be hauling, the next second you could be spinning. You gotta have a little sketchiness to it for me, for a thrilling ride. But as far as like your point A to point B work stuff, I think the EVs are kind of cool. They're not bad to work on, really, for the most part, except for some sort of manufacturer specific how they do things, but for the most part, easy to work on, all around I like them. So next question on the list here. What does a catalytic converter do for your exhaust, and why do you hear about people stealing them? I guess for starters, a catalytic converter is an emissions component on your gasoline vehicles. We're going to talk about the gasoline side, not the diesel oxidization catalyst. We're going to focus on your gasoline catalytic converters, what they're there for, what they do, and why people are stealing them. A catalytic converter, like I said, it's the emissions thing. What it's there for is any fuel, any unburnt raw fuel, basically, that your engine had not burned, through its cycle, that catalytic converter will burn. It's a chemical reaction between the certain precious metals that are inside of that converter, and any raw fuel that goes through there will basically kind of superheat up that converter and burn it. That way there's no raw fuel. It's all, clean carbon exhaust coming out of the tailpipe, no raw fuel type of deal. That's, in a sense, the point of it. It's also, what a lot of people don't know too, is if, let's say you're on the road and somebody in their car, they go to pass you, obviously they step down on it and get out in front of you to pass you, or if you're on maybe a road where it splits into 2 lanes going up a hill and you're in the slow lane and somebody goes flying by you in the fast lane, you can kind of smell that kind of awful smelling, rotten egg type of smell. That's actually the catalytic converters are working. It's burning off all that excess fuel. That's what you're smelling when they pass you. But why do people steal them? It's because of the precious metals that are inside of that converter. Platinum, palladium, there's a few others in there. They're worth quite a bit of money as far as scrap is concerned. People will steal them, cut them off, break them down, melt the metals inside of it, and sell them. It's a shame, but obviously it's just too easy for the people that, can't go get a job. Or maybe, hey, that's their fun money right there, stealing cats. But yeah, that's why people steal them. It's become a big thing now. A lot of people are getting a little bit better at trying to do things to avoid their cats being cut off and stolen. Some people are, spray painting them, because a lot of people I think that steal them, I don't necessarily think they're the ones doing the whole cut them open, melt them down. They'll just go sell them to, let's say, a salvage yard or, their Uncle Tim or something. I don't know. But a lot of people you can look up online what some people are doing. If you're worried about it, or if you're in an area where, there's been a few cats that have gone missing. Like I said, there's a few things you can do. People are spray painting them certain colors. Obviously with a high temp paint, let's not get with the whole, anything that's going to be flammable here, or engraving in the side of the cat, with a grinder or Dremel or anything like that. There's a few things you can do to try to, keep them from being snagged on you.
So catalytic converters could be sprayed with high temp paint and etched with identifying numbers that tie that converter to that car.
But yeah, that's what the converter is there for, and that's why people are taking them. Alrighty, next question, kind of a fun one. I'm going to try to keep her simple. Twin turbo or single turbo, advantages and disadvantages of both. I'll try to touch on as much as I can. It really depends on what you're doing, what kind of vehicle you have. Really just the application alone is going to be what the pros and cons of certain kits are. Kind of for the basics, generally speaking, a twin turbo system is used in probably more of your street applications that are we're going to try to stick with more of like an aftermarket. If you were going to do a turbo setup on something, twin versus single. But a twin setup generally is going to run two smaller turbochargers that will spool a lot quicker and give you maybe a bit more drivability when it comes to the street type of thing. Same reason for some of your, factory style turbo systems now. Some of your more high strung, like 6 cylinders nowadays in your trucks, are twin turbo, couple smaller turbos that'll spool up. They'll still make enough power up top to keep what you're doing with the truck happy, but they're not really like a huge, power hunter type of setup. Single turbo, generally speaking, is used aftermarket in an application where you're shooting for kind of high power, high numbers. They're harder to spool because it's one big, large single turbo. I would mainly say more of like a racing application type of deal. Then again, there's a ton of reasons why you wouldn't run a twin or a single. But like I said, generally speaking, single turbo takes a little longer to spool, but generally they're a lot happier up top. They make your high horsepower numbers, a little less drive pressure on the engine. All around is kind of for your high numbers. Fast car, race type of application would be a single. Now, there are twin setups that work absolutely phenomenal for racing as well. And in fact, a lot of guys will run a twin setup, but again, it all depends on what you're doing. A lot of times too, it has to do with how much room is under the hood. I don't know if you've popped your hood on any of your modern vehicles these days. A lot of them are actually factory turbocharged now, but you pop the hood and there's not a whole lot of room underneath there to fit a whole lot of extra stuff. So sometimes a twin setup is not justifiable without going crazy, completely redoing everything, where a single turbo might sneak in somewhere and it's just a little bit easier to run on more of a factory style, setup. Like I said, there's a lot of advantages and disadvantages. Mainly all comes down to application, what you're doing with the vehicle you got, and whatnot. So, alrighty guys, next question. The difference between headers and stock manifolds. I guess, kind of the purpose of headers, or I guess let's do the physical side of things first here. What is a header compared to what your stock exhaust manifold would look like? at least, again, generally speaking, your exhaust manifold is kind of a rail in a sense. Coming off, let's say you have a V8, you're working with one side of the engine, 4 cylinders, you'll have 4 exhaust ports that all come straight out into a single rail where they meet, and it'll have a little collector before they, the exhaust flows through the rest of the system. On a header, what you'll have is same engine platform, or actually, here, perfect. This would be a factory manifold here, where you have 4 straight ports going into one single rail here before it exits out the back. On a header, what you'll have is you'll have 4 individual pipes coming off of, and a lot of your higher end systems, they'll use equal length, which means even your port that'll come off the rear cylinder, normally it would be a lot shorter just because, you're only reaching right out to where the collector is, but the companies will make that tube bend out and around to be the same length as even your farthest out cylinder, to where it has to go to the collector, all equal length ports. And all 4 of those individual pipes kind of meet in a group of 4 into a chamber that's called your collector. And so, like I said, each cylinder will have its own pipe going into the collector before it goes through the rest of the exhaust. That would be the physical side of things. There are mainly, just generally speaking, for your regular everyday vehicles, 3 types of exhaust manifold, or 3 types of headers, I should say. You've got shorty headers, mid-range headers, and long tube headers. They all have their advantages and disadvantages in performance and also fitment. Because you can't fit you could, but just for a bolt-on application, sometimes it's really tough and not a fun job at all to fit a long tube header into a vehicle. Sometimes you have to run an aftermarket K-member, which is the whole suspension and engine support underneath your car, just to be able to fit a long tube header. That being said, somebody that's just looking to do a quick bolt-on, probably not running a long tube. But as far as performance is concerned, shorty headers are generally spoken, to have improvements at your high RPM, mid-range, in long tubes, generally for torque. Lower end torque is where you'll see most of the gain just for a header swap out. That's not necessarily the case for every engine though. Just depending on how that cylinder head flows, what other kind of power adders you might be pushing through that engine. Again, that was kind of a generally speaking. Where you'll see the gains, not always the case. A lot of times you'll see the most gains with a long tube style header on your V8 applications that are maybe running a supercharger or even naturally aspirated. You'll see a gain across the board instead of just your mid-range or your high range. There are certain applications where, just because of how that cylinder head flows, where a certain header might actually lose, you might decrease your power and efficiency. So, it's always best to dive into maybe what you're doing or what kind of engine platform you're on before you just go ahead and buy yourself a set of headers. But for the most part, those are the gains. The reason you run 4 separate individual pipes instead of going into one rail is for cylinder scavenging. When that cylinder's exhaust valve opens and the exhaust shoots down that port, normally in a standard rail, all that exhaust will just ping into that pipe and it'll just push in. Every one of those cylinders will just kind of help push into the rest of the exhaust. The purpose of a header having individual ports is each time that cylinder will be on, or a cylinder will be on its exhaust stroke, it'll almost create a bit of a vacuum on the other, let's say V8 again, one side, on the other 3 cylinders that are on that same side. So when they are on their exhaust stroke, the exhaust hit from the other cylinder will kind of help vacuum and pull all of the exhaust out of that chamber, out of the cylinder, before the exhaust valve closes. So they really just help scavenge all the exhaust out of the cylinder completely, before that exhaust valve closes, and they help flow to less back pressure, just increase of flow in general. Like I said though, as far as what you'll actually see for gains, all depends on type of engine, other power adders you've got going on there. But usually there's a lot of information coming from that company on a lot of information coming from whatever company's headers are buying. They are the ones that are doing all the R&R so you know what you'll see for gains or maybe decreases. So, yeah. Alrighty, next question. What is boost? We love boost. We all love boost, right? Yeah, what is boost? Basically, pressure, you could call it, that is higher than our atmospheric pressure. Boost is going to be a little bit different depending on where you're at with sea level, but the reason that you would run boost or a boosted application is to basically force more air in your engine than the atmosphere would. So your normal engines with, you know, gasoline side of things, for instance, your throttle plate's closed when the engine's sitting there idling, and you're barely sucking a little bit of air into those cylinders. On a wide open throttle instance, your throttle plate will open, and the atmosphere, in a way, will pressurize that intake manifold and your engine with atmospheric pressure. The thing about that is you can only fit, you know, the atmosphere only has so much pressure. Around here, we're right around 14 psi of atmospheric pressure. So that is the maximum amount of air that is going to get forced in to that engine when the throttle plate opens. That being said, to keep a good air-fuel ratio, you can only add so much fuel into that cylinder depending on how much oxygen is going in. So what you're doing with boost, let's say you turbocharge something, supercharge something, even sometimes with like your Ram hoods, the Ram Air hoods that are actually functional going down the road, you are kind of pressurizing air in a way, not a ton, we're not talking necessarily a ton of boost, but just extra air added in there. Now you can add more fuel and make more power, for instance, but boost pressure is basically more air or added air to our atmospheric pressure. And the more air you can jam into your engine, the more fuel that you can run, and the more power it's going to make for the most part. Now, that's when you get into the sticky situation of, well, how much boost can I run? Well, depends on how deep your pockets are. Yeah, no, really, certain components in your engine, number one being pistons and rods. How strong are they? You know, the more boost you'll add, the quicker you'll figure that out. Every application is a little bit different, but you know, that really is what is boost. Added air into the engine, more air than the atmospheric pressure that you have there. Alrighty, we've got a fun one. Why do some people have tuners for their vehicles with different settings? And how does all that work? I'll try to keep it simple just because there's many different ways, many different vehicles, different types of fuels, do different things. It can be kind of a real long drawn out conversation. But for the most part, some people, mainly let's say your hotshot guys or guys that are towing on the road, or people with diesel trucks that are towing a lot, might have different tuners with different settings. I guess even some of your gasoline guys will have, you know, your tow tunes, street tunes, race tunes on their programmer. What's the purpose for having different settings? Really, all of it is, you know, comes down to application. Again, really, a tune file that's going to be on a truck for towing is going to be maybe a bit more moderate, configuration. You know, you're not going to have as much on the diesel side of things, you know, fuel timing, or on the gasoline side of things, ignition timing. On certain engines like variable valve timing engines, the way, you know, or how advanced everything's going to be running. You're really, when you're towing, you're trying to keep things cool. You want power, but you're more or less concerned about temperatures of everything. So a configuration for a towing tune is going to be trying to keep everything cool. Same thing, it'll usually change a little bit of everything inside the transmission as well, as far as shift points, kind of the fluid pressure or line pressure in your transmission, how it's shifting, when it's going to lock your torque converter. Certain things like that are going to be different on a tow setting versus even a street or a race setting. A street setting is probably going to be best of both worlds. Not crazy high shift points on the transmission, not crazy high pressures until need be. It's going to maybe have a more aggressive on the engine side of things as far as timing, all that. Sometimes it's going to require maybe even on the gasoline side of things a higher grade of fuel just because you are running the ignition timing a lot higher. And you're running maybe the RPM a little bit higher than you would on a tow tune. And then same thing for race, like more of a race tune they would call it, or a performance tune. Now you're going to be really changing the shift points in the transmission, pressures when the converter's locking on you, and really advancing timing to make the most peak power you can at usually a higher RPM. On the diesel stuff, it would be more of a, you're adding a lot of fuel, adding more boost when you're adding a lot of fuel, and just creating more power in general. Same thing, changing transmission files a little bit that are going to be harder, more defined shifting, but like I said, mainly geared up towards your higher RPM, trying to make more power, which, like I said, is not what you want if you're going to be towing anything. But yeah, I guess that would be why people have different settings on their programmer, and that's kind of a little bit on how it all works. Some vehicles are capable of doing what they call a switch on the fly tuning, where you have a dial and you can change it. Some vehicles aren't capable of that, depending on the type of computer you have in your vehicle. Sometimes you actually have to stop and completely reprogram the vehicle. But otherwise, yeah, that's pretty much a good rundown of why you would want at least different settings on your vehicle as far as tuning is concerned. Let's hit it. Diesel versus gas. Big debate. Everyone's got their own opinions. I will tell you my opinion, I guess, being a technician. Honestly, more times than not, gas. There are a very few number of people that really, I guess in essence, would want or need a diesel truck. Diesel trucks are awesome. They're fun. They can be fun. They tow great. The power they make. Maybe we'll stick to more of like a factory standpoint first here. For towing, you're not going to out-tow a diesel engine from the factory out of any other factory standpoint. You're just not. And anyone, that has drove one for towing, or at least was able to drive one while towing fairly heavy, will say the same thing. Can't beat it. Ton of torque, absolutely ton of torque. No, not all this downshifting, and you can hold your, a lot of guys, you get out west into some real big winds, you can hold your speed. Some of those gas guys, and I've been in trucks where you're hauling a trailer and you hit wind, and you got it just wide open. Foot to the floor, you're doing 60, that's all you're doing. Not on the diesel stuff. There's a ton more power, ton more torque, on the table there for the towing. That's really where diesel shines. Fuel mileage anymore, meh, maybe a hair more. I guess on your half-ton stuff now, they're starting to come out with, obviously they've had your eco-diesel out for a while, the little 3-liter Power Strokes when they did them in the F-150s, and now your half-ton and even real light duty like the GMC Canyon or Colorado little diesels and those. Now, yeah, diesel's kind of cool for fuel mileage because these guys are getting 30, 40, maybe close to 50 miles a gallon. Same thing with the little VW diesels. Yeah, you get great fuel mileage, but just for standard full-size truck platform, I guess we'll call it, diesel, you're really not a whole lot better on the fuel mileage. Even when you're towing, you get, 15,000 pounds behind her. It's going to tow the load a lot better than your gas stuff is, but you're not going to get great fuel mileage doing it either. Maybe a hair better, but the price difference between gas and fuel ain't going to compensate for, what you paid for it. So, I guess cons of a diesel. Very, very, very expensive to maintain. And that's everything from, oil changes, double the price. Fuel filters, every other oil change at least, there's $300 or better on some of these trucks. They're so expensive to maintain. The other side of things, you can literally buy a remanufactured long block for a Chevy, a 5.3 or a 6.0 or a 6.2 for just about the same price as you can get a new injection pump for your diesel engine. Especially when they fail and wreak havoc on your old engine. Yeah, price-wise, repairs, way more expensive. It's very rare to get a diesel truck in this shop that's got a running concern that leaves here for under $1,000, and that just is what it is. They're very expensive to fix. They run great when they're running. When they don't, you know, bust out the old wallet, because it ain't gonna be a cheap fix. Gasoline stuff, oh, she's not running right, oh, bring her in. You know, I'm just saying, you know, spark plug, coil pack. For the most part, let's say the engine's gone. It's not gonna be nothing near what it's gonna cost to fix your diesel, so. That's where the gasoline stuff shines. A lot of it actually, too, these days with the emission stuff. You know, back in the day, old Jim Bob used to be able to just let his diesel run all winter long, not shut her off. You know, great, cool. Can't do that anymore. That's the way your emission systems work. And actually, a lot of these vehicles now have, or a lot of your modern day diesel engines have timers on them, just because in order to burn up all the soot that the emissions is capturing in your diesel truck, in order to burn it all up, that truck needs to be drove hard. When it's sitting there idling, it can't do that. Nothing works properly. So all your new trucks actually have timers on them, to where if you let it idle 15, 20 minutes, it'll shut itself off just to keep itself from plugging up. Which, you know, to some people, whatever, maybe you use your truck for what it's for, hauling. But maybe for your guys that, you know, you go to get coffee in the morning, you run to work and back. Diesel, you're going to have a hard time trying to keep that thing happy. Just are. You're going to be going through components that aren't getting used the way they need to be used. So for that kind of driving, you know, gasoline all the way. You know, it's hard to hurt them. It's hard to upset them. They don't plug up, let them run. The gasoline stuff heats up, and we're up here in northern country. Gasoline stuff heats up so much nicer in the wintertime. That sucker's usually blown warm by the time you pull out of your driveway. Diesel, you better have your mittens on for the first 15, 20 minutes. I don't care if it's been running for a half hour. She ain't gonna be warm until you're almost to town. That's just, you know, the nature of the engine. So they obviously all have their ups and downs. Gas versus diesel, tough toss-up. Depends on what you're doing with it. We love our diesels here, but we're also here to make money. So, you know, they kind of go hand in hand. Gasoline stuff, again, they're cool. Do they make a ton of power? No. But, you know, they're all nice trucks anymore. Just depends on what you're using it for. Alrighty, guys. That's going to wrap her up for Q&A number 2. Thanks for sticking through to the end here for us. I really appreciate it. Hopefully I learned you a couple things. If not, sorry, and I'll try to get you on the next round. Yeah, just again, if you could give us, you know, a like and a follow, that'd be awesome. Really helps us reach out to other people. It really helps us know what kind of videos that you guys are actually into. So again, thanks for the Q&A number 2.